Well, pleasure to have with us here today William P. Lauder, who is Executive Chairman of the Estee Lauder Companies. The company, which is celebrating its 75th anniversary this year, has grown really from a small family business started by William's grandparents to a global leader in prestige beauty with over 25 brands sold across 150 countries and territories and more than $14 billion in net sales. As I mentioned a moment ago, he is the Executive Chairman. He has also served as CEO and COO. He is responsible for launching the company's e-commerce business and pioneered its innovative store within a store concept. He is also a lecturer at the Wharton School, where he teaches decision-making in the leadership chair for MBA students, a class he has taught for close to a decade now. William, great to talk to you. Hope you're doing very well right now.
Well, thanks for inviting me to join you today.
So let's start with this class that you have taught. And from what I understand, it brings senior leaders from across industries into the classroom to share their expertise with the next generation of leaders. Last year, interestingly enough, you joined a pair of faculty colleagues to create and lead a new course, Leading in Challenging Times, which really focused on the variety of crises we dealt with in 2020 and what we may see beyond. If you go back and look at that class, what were some of the overarching themes from all of the executives that you interviewed?
Well, there's so many, but I think we can say that regardless of the industry or sector, and we had guests from the public sector, we had guests from the nonprofit world, as well as corporate leaders. The consistent themes were people first, transform ahead of a crisis where possible, or use the crisis for meaningful transformation. Communicate, never stop communicating. And from a leadership perspective, always bring your full self. It became ever more apparent that this was necessary during this pandemic environment, because our responsibility as leaders was to give those people whom we have the responsibility to lead the confidence that they could do their jobs effectively, and that they were appreciated, for their efforts were appreciated, and that we were accomplishing something. And I would say this environment had created a great opportunity for us. And we also were able to hear from some incredible leaders who went through. We heard from, for example, from Regina Cunningham, the CEO of the Hospital for the University of Pennsylvania. And she told us how they dealt with the crisis. And I'm bookending. Regina was our first guest, and our last guest was Dr. Judith Rodin, who was the former president of the University of Pennsylvania. And one of the stories she talked about was not only her time at Rockefeller, after she left the University of Pennsylvania to lead the Rockefeller Foundation and building resilience and getting, organizations, cities, governments to be resilient. She also talked about how the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania almost pulled down the entire university financially when she first stepped into the role as president of the university. So I looked at that as bookends, and we had corporate leaders along the way too, who were sharing their experiences, including Alice Gorski, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, who shared the experience that they have in working closely with their many collaborators to create a vaccine that would help to serve people around the world. So we had lots of different experiences and lots of different key core characteristics that we learned.
So here we are about 15 months into the pandemic. How would you say that the Estee Lauder companies have been doing? How have they come through all of that has been put in front of them over the last several months?
Well, this is not the first time we as a company have been faced with a crisis like this before. It's obviously a very different crisis, but we've been faced with crises certainly throughout my career. In the mid to late 1980s, many of our department store partners in North America were either 60%, in fact, were either in bankruptcy, on the way into bankruptcy, or on the way out of bankruptcy. So we were faced with an existential challenge, which we had to address. That led to us opening our own retail store format for a number of our brands, so that we had an alternative to our dependence on third-party retail partners. The financial crisis of 2008-9 focused us in a number of different ways. We became quite concerned about the ability of our network of suppliers to be able to keep us supplied. And we became quite concerned with the viability of many of our retail partners again, and their ability to keep us to survive. And again, we found ways to pivot and adjust to deal with the crisis. And now we're faced with a new crisis in the pandemic, which our teams have largely done an excellent job in weathering through. And again, we're able to do that because we have as a mindset our ability to adjust and connect and reconnect in different ways. And we have, and one of the mantras that we've had now for a number of years is you have to accept change as a constant. We have to be constantly doing better. We, the Estee Lauder companies, are in the consumer products business, which means we're running up the down escalator. So we constantly have to be doing better just to stay in place, run in place, if not keep going up. I'm deeply grateful for our resilient global workforce and their dedication to our business, and particularly how they have been able to navigate this pandemic so effectively. And in many ways, shapes, and forms, even though we're all separated by distance and we're connecting with each other on Zoom, I feel in many ways that our teams are closer than ever because they're with each other constantly while having not left home.
So for you personally, in terms of being the executive chairman, how has this pandemic impacted your concept of leadership? And obviously, as you said, you've gone through a variety of different crises over your time with the company. Has it tweaked or changed your concept of leadership or even the concept of risk?
I don't think that this pandemic has changed any in our posture towards risk. We have always been willing to take risks. We just don't want to take systemic risks that threaten the existence or the viability of the organization. As far as taking risk in business, look, we took a risk in the mid to late 1980s when we started investing, and we ended up investing over $100 million or more in building our online business. Had we not invested in it then, and had we not made subsequent investments over the years to the point when it was finally able to stand on its own and produce the kind of success we've seen, we would not have been prepared to weather this crisis the way we were. So I use that as an example to say we were prepared. We didn't know what was going to hit us, but we used our experience over the years to prepare ourselves for something like this so that we could be able to serve our consumer while not being able to serve her in the same way we have for the past 75 years. And that's a lot of it is, we live on, I have a book that sits on the coffee table in my office by Andrew Grove, says that only the paranoid survive. And if you realize that your paranoia forces you to be prepared, and that preparedness gives you that capability to be resilient, that's an important part of what we do. And our leadership team practices productive paranoia. They're proactively imagining what could go wrong and how we can evolve to meet these uncertain items. We couldn't have predicted this at all, but we planned and prepared for disruptions, and we were ready for it. And lastly, we have to have this characteristics of grit, that determination. And many of you may be aware of another professor from the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Angela Duckworth, and she wrote a book about grit. And she's one of the world's leading experts on that stick-to-itiveness and the passion that people put into solving new problems and keep trying and solving. All these characteristics, which we believe we have embedded in the DNA of our organization, these are the characteristics that allowed us to weather this storm.
So how do you think then those concepts filtered down over the last many months when you're talking about taking care of your employees and obviously all of the challenges that they're facing in their personal lives, and then how that crosses over to the workplace?
So one of the things that I'm very proud we've been able to do is I have stepped up in a meaningful way our educational programs. We call them town halls and basically I've touched over 10,000 employees in the last year since the start of the pandemic from around the world. I do early morning meetings with the European team, middle of the day meetings with our North American teams, and end of the day late night sessions with our Asia Pacific teams. My feeling was and still is that we have to be ever more present as leaders during a time of crisis, especially when many of our employees feel isolated. So we've stepped up a lot of the efforts we've made during this time just for this reason, so that we can remain connected and demonstrate our caring for our employees, and demonstrate also that we don't want them to lose a step along the way. So in order for us to do that, we have to continually touch them and reach them in a meaningful way. And that has really made a difference, I believe, for the connectedness that our employees feel for our company.
So if I can, let me talk business here for a second, because the most recent earnings report seemed to be fairly positive. Makeup did take a bit of a hit, but with so many people working from home, I'm wondering if that was to be expected a bit. I assume that you expect to see a return to the usage of various products as the year goes on, and more people are returning to their offices.
Well, I certainly would expect so. You know, the idea that we were not putting on as much makeup and not putting on, not getting ourselves dressed in the same way because everyone only sees us from a certain level up. We believe that as people start returning, they start returning to more public lives, if you will, and seeing their colleagues in person in their offices, going shopping, going out to dinner and going to restaurants, going to museums and whatnot. I think people's buying patterns and usage patterns are going to return to pre-pandemic levels in certain ways. But I also do believe that this has fundamentally changed in other ways. For example, we've seen skincare explode during this period of time. And we've seen it meaningfully take a meaningfully bigger share of our total business than previously, because consumers are very, very concerned about their skin, and they realize when they see themselves on camera all the time that they need to have healthy skin. But looking ahead, we're preparing for a renaissance in makeup, and we anticipate that the momentum will gradually build around the world, driven by local reopenings and social and professional occasions, like I mentioned before, which are going to drive more desire to put on your face, get made up, and to look good.
So obviously a good bit of that has occurred over the last 14 months, 15 months on the digital realm through e-commerce. What has this been like for the Estee Lauder companies over this period of time? Are you seeing this market increase in digital purchasing?
Yes, we saw one way I can characterize the pandemic is it accelerated and steepened the slope of trends we saw coming. So online has been growing at a very meaningful pace now for well more than a decade. The pandemic created more of a hockey stick effect, and we saw a very meaningful increase in the steepness of the slope of the improvement in online business. Simultaneously, we'd seen a diminution in the sales trends in department stores. And again, the pandemic accelerated that in a meaningful way. So we saw, if you will, offsetting accelerations. And I fully expect the way we work, we've all learned something about ourselves and how we work. And I think the future is going to be somewhat different than what it was in the past. So we have to be adjusting accordingly. Online will continue to accelerate and become, it's really the front door to where the consumer sees you. But we're also in a category of merchandise where the digital experience is not the same as the in-store experience. So the sensory experience of visiting a store and smelling a fragrance or trying that lipstick or trying that cream and feeling the slip and feeling how it makes you feel, I don't believe we can replace that, perhaps in my lifetime, digitally. So what we have to do instead is excite the consumer enough that she is motivated either to try it by ordering online or to try it by going to a store and seeing what it's like in the closest store to her and shopping on it that way. Online has been an important part of what we're doing, and it will continue to be an important part, but it's still about the high touch. And we have to have high touch digital, and we have to have high touch in person. Using our brand sites such as live chat, enhanced virtual try-ons, live streaming, we have to be as exciting, and we have to make it as an exciting experience digitally as it is in store.
Have you seen then other areas of the operation where the company has been impacted longer term because of the pandemic?
Well, we're taking a very hard look at our office occupancy and the working environment, and we're looking at how people work. And so, for example, we're thinking about those jobs that are really most effective done in person, those jobs which are really can be just as effectively done remotely, and those jobs which can be done in a hybrid manner. And that's going to change the way we work, the way we interact with each other, and how much and where we're going to seat and how we're going to seat everybody. We have to give everybody more space than previously so they can be properly socially distanced.
Right.
We have to meaningfully upgrade the technology in our conference rooms so that those who are not present can be present electronically and not feel that they're at a disadvantage. I think one of the biggest issues for us as business, and not just for Estee Lauder, but for all businesses, how have we redefined business travel? What are we going to do? Are we going to make those trips halfway around the world for a 2-hour meeting? Or are we going to look at those trips in a different way and say, no, I can project myself there through a Zoom or another platform, and the trip itself has got to be much more meaningful for me to actually get on the plane to go there. And I think we have to ask ourselves those questions about, as a business, what is a valid business, what is a business justified reason for making the trip? And how can we make a difference when we do make those trips?
How has supply chain been impacted during this time of the pandemic for Estee Lauder companies during this time? And whatever impacts that have occurred, do you assume that they're fairly temporary at this point?
Well, I think we have a very diverse supplier network, which ensures that our business is able to continue to operate despite the impact on any one or more of our suppliers. We've seen rising costs and pressure on transportation across industries. We've also seen some pressure on the labor force. Our factories, our supply chain was able to pivot very quickly and very early on in the crisis. We were able to produce hand sanitizer and other items for our own workers as well as for frontline workers. And everyone adjusted accordingly. Emptied a lot of our supply chain offices, which are largely attached to our manufacturing facilities, to create more room for those people who are working on the floor for break rooms, so they had the proper space and distancing. And we're constantly looking at how we can keep our supply chain as resilient as possible, especially when it relates to the components and the inputs into our manufacturing processes. And we have to find ways to manage the upward pricing pressures, which we're finding, because we know the consumers can only absorb so much. So we have to make sure that we continue to deliver the highest quality products for the most fair price for all of our consumers across all of our brands.
Effective leaders are said that they never stop learning. So even as your role here as executive chairman, how do you ensure that you are constantly learning and growing?
Well, I have this unique privilege of being the executive chairman of a business which was started by my grandparents, grown by my father, parents, and other members of my family. But we often say we are more than a family business, but rather we are a family in business. I've learned powerful, distinct lessons from each member of my family, from my grandparents, my parents, and now working alongside my cousins. But on a broader level, we pride ourselves on being a learning organization. And by that, I mean, our culture is one of continuous learning, and we recognize that. And I'm constantly looking for new ideas. And I learned as much in this class that I led with my two colleagues as I hope our students did, because I learned from some amazing people think about how they thought about the crisis, how they dealt with the crisis, what was their mindset, and how did they maintain that? And I found that to be a great experience. And like I talked about earlier, we have been doing constant executive education for our people at all levels of the organization, because not only do we need to remain in touch, we have to continually help them to be better. And we pride ourselves on this. The appetite for learning across our organization is extraordinarily high, and our commitment to invest in educational resources is matching that pace. And we found that enrollment in a lot of these programs has only grown dramatically in a way that we never saw before. But learning is everyone's responsibility. From every chair at every level, we all have to find ways to improve ourselves and help those others whom we have the opportunity and responsibility to lead, help them to improve themselves too.
William, want to thank you for a few moments here today. We wish you all the best. Look forward to seeing you back on the Penn campus at Wharton here sometime in the near future.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for having me. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. William P. Lauder, who's Executive Chairman of the Estee Lauder companies.